Hey everybody, it's Corona Story Time, and I'm going to read a portion of my all-time very favorite book, Forgetting Ourselves on Purpose, Vocation and the Ethics of Ambition by Brian Mahan. And I sometimes call this nature's most nearly perfect book. And I'm going to read a story from about the middle of it. And the story is called The Eraser and the Mendacious Mantra. Richard Johnson sat right in front of me in first grade. Richard wore white shirts with dark ink stains on them. Our teacher was Miss Sullivan, not the Miss Sullivan who taught third grade, who I had a crush on, who later became managing editor of Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, and who was left-handed and for that reason encouraged me in my own sinisterism. But the Miss Sullivan who was the first grade teacher, near retirement at the time, and who had reputedly once pulled down some unfortunate kid's pants and whacked him with a hairbrush, and who, worse than that, kept moving my pencil from my left hand to my right. These days, however, Miss Sullivan the elder seemed somewhat less daunting. A harsh but finally ineffectual disciplinarian, she had trouble bringing anyone to justice. It was no secret that Miss Sullivan had trouble hearing, nor were the implications of the fact lost on us. When she turned her back to us to write on the board, she was oblivious to what went on in class. Richard and I had devised a game. We played it when Miss Sullivan went to the board. The game was called Hide the Eraser. Each of us had about half of one of those large gum-colored erasers. They were called Jiffy erasers, I think, and each had the likeness of a knight riding a stallion imprinted on it. I recall being pleased that you could see considerably more than half of the stallion and rider on the half I received. Anyway, the idea behind the game is obvious enough. Richard would hide the eraser somewhere on his person, or more rarely in his desk, and I would have to guess where it was. There really weren't too many possibilities, and to tell the truth, I don't remember whether we played this game for just a few days or weeks or only on this one day. In any case, I was behind in this day's contest. Richard had cleverly hidden the eraser in his shoe or someplace, and it had taken me 16 guesses to figure it out. I had already challenged both my own and Richard's sense of propriety by hiding it in my underpants in an earlier round. A good inning, by the way. But was now left high and dry. Then it came to me. It couldn't miss. Brilliant! Richard would never get this one. Who would believe I possessed the courage and skill to stick the eraser up my nose? To my surprise, it fit quite comfortably. That is, it took a little work, anything worthwhile does, but there was a lot more room up there than I expected. Failing to impute anything from my slightly congested tone as I responded to his queries, no, it's not inside my right sock, or no, it's not inside my Chet Hilton baseball novel, or inside my desktop ink pen holder. Richard became increasingly frustrated and confused. He guessed dozens of times without success, and I forged into the lead. Finally, as Miss Sullivan turned to write some sort of phonetic formula on the board, Richard turned to me and said, all right, I give, produce it. He meant by this, of course, that he thought I was lying and that I needed to demonstrate that it was not someplace he'd already guessed. Happy to oblige my vanquished adversary, I delicately placed my middle finger up my nose to retrieve the Jiffy eraser, smirking at Richard triumphantly as I did so. Only the Jiffy eraser failed to respond properly. In fact, I had the sickly sense that it might even have gone up a little further, drawn by a gentle suction phenomenon of some kind. Produce it, Richard repeated. You can't produce it, can you? Having no notion of nasal passages or where they led, I thought that the eraser was moving toward my brain, was already quite near it, in fact. Concerned, but thus far fighting off panic, I enlisted my pinky finger, thinking the task demanded a more delicate instrument than I had at first supposed. The results were even worse, and I was sure this time that the Jiffy eraser, stallion, knight, and all, was slowly but inevitably being sucked into my brain. By this time, Richard was a blur, and produce it, a distant echo. I was overwhelmed by a sense of cold panic. My life was freeze-framed and my mouth hung wide open. An eraser lodged in my brain suggested terrifying possibilities. One last try resulted in what I most feared, the total disappearance, as I saw it, of the eraser into my brain. I was terrified, stunned, paralyzed, and above all, alone. Miss Sullivan would not sympathize. Richard would not sympathize. And my father, oh dear God. But then something occurred to me. A miraculous way out came to me in a flash, and I knew just what I had to do. I said firmly to myself, and I meant it with all my heart, this did not happen. It did not happen. I certainly did not stick an eraser up my nose. I felt an immediate sense of relief, despite occasional tremors. I found to my surprise that I could chase away my fears, my shame, by simply repeating my mendacious mantra as often as necessary. The strategy worked for a couple of days. Unfortunately, the left side of my face began to swell and one eye closed. So I was off to Harvard Square to see Dr. Vogel, whom I had already admired, at least until recently, when I heard him call another boy Chief as I waited outside his office. "Take it easy, Chief," he said to me as he peered up my nose with a tiny light. "Say, Chief," Dr. Vogel inquired nonchalantly, "did you stick anything up your nose recently? Something pretty big?" "No, Dr. Vogel, I did not," I replied with conviction and mock confusion. A moment later, I was being hoisted onto the examining table. Out came the tweezers, or something like tweezers. "I've got something here, Betty," he told my anxious mother. "There it is." He brought the disgusting thing over to the sink and washed it off. Maybe it was a growth, I thought. Dr. Vogel had said something about a growth to my mother earlier, and I could tell that a growth wasn't my fault. I held my breath. My, Chief, what have we here? Why, look at that. It's a Jiffy eraser with a picture of a knight on it. I wonder how that ever got up there. Do you think maybe they wrote up your nose while you weren't looking? I was, of course, as incredulous as he, as incredulous as my poor mother, who looked plaintively into my eyes and said, "But Brian, you've always been such an honest little guy." Ouch. But all was not lost. After all, Dr. Vogel had produced it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you soon.